The CTO stared at the screen, white-knuckled, as Everlight's 4.5M contract vanished in real time, transferred to the man he'd fired just weeks earlier. The boardroom erupted. Phones rang like sirens. Somewhere, Nathan Hale was already smiling. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The air in the glass-walled conference room was sterile, too clean, like a surgical theater moments before an incision. Nathan Hale sat down slowly, deliberately, across from Cameron Bryce, the boy he once taught how to code, now dressed in a tailored suit that couldn't hide his twitching fingers. Next to him, Jillian from HR clutched a folder with the kind of paper that meant finality. She avoided eye contact. Cameron leaned forward, elbows on the table, trying to strike a tone of fake empathy but overshooting into patronizing. "Nathan," he began, "you've done incredible work here, but we're at an inflection point. The board is prioritizing agility, fresh perspectives, nimble frameworks. It's not personal. The decision wasn't easy." But Nathan wasn't listening to words. He was listening to tone, the same rehearsed rhythm he'd heard consultants use before a layoff sweep. And while Cameron played at being thoughtful, Nathan's eyes tracked the faint twitch in his jawline, the subtle shift of his weight. Tells of guilt disguised as professionalism. 18 years. 18 years of 70-hour weeks, of putting out fires no one else could, of building Stratix's foundational architecture long before they had funding. He had interviewed over 200 engineers personally, mentored 80, hand-picked the core team. He had stayed through mergers, pivot crises, and product overhauls. And now, here he was, being shown the door by the very person who once shadowed him to meetings just to learn how to ask the right questions. Nathan didn't blink, didn't breathe deep, didn't grant them the satisfaction of visible hurt. He nodded once, like acknowledging a misbehaving child. "I see," he said. "Then let's not waste each other's time." Jillian opened the folder, but Nathan stood before she could speak. "Send it to my lawyer," he said curtly. He paused at the doorway, turned halfway, his voice dropping into something heavier than anger, measured, surgical. "You've just started a fire you can't control. No slamming doors, no dramatic exits, just footsteps that echoed like a countdown." By the time he returned to his office, word had already begun to spread. People sensed something was wrong. But Nathan didn't explain. He sat at his desk, opened Slack, and wrote a single message. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't emotional. It was a matchhead struck in silence. "Thank you all. Friday is my last day. But this isn't over. If you ever believed in what we built, stay tuned." Then he logged out. Not a word more. The fallout didn't begin with thunder. It began with stillness, an unnatural silence that settled across Stratix's engineering floor like a fog. Desks that once buzzed with idle chatter and quiet keyboard symphonies felt suddenly hollow, as though something essential had been carved out. On Slack, threads once alive with Nathan Hale's thoughtful insights, his quiet corrections, his midnight replies, his lines of encouragement, now hung cold and unanswered. There were no jokes on Friday night, no dev hell memes, just absence. By Saturday morning, the message Nathan had sent had been screenshotted, shared, and whispered through private channels and encrypted group chats. His departure wasn't viewed as retirement or redundancy. It was seen for what it truly was, an act of corporate betrayal. And to those who had come of age under his mentorship, it was personal. Nathan hadn't merely managed them. He had molded them. He had stood up to marketing when deadlines threatened code integrity. He had taken the blame when product launches stumbled. He had been the one who, during a system outage, stayed 32 hours straight, drinking black coffee and sleeping on the floor of the server room. When others chased promotions, Nathan built culture, trust, loyalty. And now, stripped from the company like a faulty component, he had left behind not just a vacuum of leadership, but a moral chasm. On Monday, HR received 10 resignations. No drama, just precision. All from engineers who had been with the company for 5 years or more. Veterans, culture carriers, the kinds of people Stratix thought they could count on. On Tuesday, more followed. Quiet meetings held in stairwells, calendars marked with innocuous placeholders. The trickle turned into a hemorrhage. By Wednesday, 24 engineers were gone. The entire back-end division, half of DevOps. The QA lead, known for her brutal honesty and refusal to compromise test coverage. Even 2 senior architects, both of whom were once rumored to be in line for VP titles, walked out without fanfare. Inside Stratix, the mood shifted from confusion to full-blown alarm. The COO, blindsided, canceled his trip to New York. Support tickets began piling up. Sprint planning devolved into finger-pointing. Key product deadlines slipped into the red. And worst of all, Everlight Industries, their flagship client, abruptly hit the brakes on a multi-million-dollar deployment. Just one sentence in their email. We'd like to revisit terms once your team is stabilized. What they didn't know, what no one at Stratix yet understood, was that the exodus wasn't just a rebellion. It was an alignment. And Nathan Hale had already drawn the blueprint. It didn't take long for the vultures to circle. By Monday morning, the headlines were impossible to ignore. CTO bleeds talent, investors panic, Stratix loses its spine, and most damning of all, mass resignation at Stratix CTO's misstep or strategic blunder. The cover story on Tech Pulse Weekly, complete with a side-by-side photo of Cameron Bryce and Nathan Hale. One wore the sharp suit of a man in free fall, the other a quiet smile, arms folded, as if daring the world to ask what he knew that others didn't. Behind the scenes, Stratix was unraveling. The boardroom, once a place of clean numbers and confident projections, now reeked of sweat and confusion. Red graphs bled across slide decks. Investors flooded the IR line, their voices sharp, clipped, demanding explanations. In 5 trading days, Stratix stock had lost 18% of its value, a hemorrhage with no bandage in sight. Cameron Bryce was no longer the golden boy. In emergency meetings, board members no longer asked if the resignations had been mishandled. They asked why he hadn't seen them coming, why he'd underestimated Nathan, why he'd dismissed Hale as a relic when he was, in fact, the architect of the very structure now crumbling beneath them. And Cameron? He was scrambling. Emails sent at 2:00 a.m. Let's grab coffee. No hard feelings. I want to clear the air. Every message more desperate than the last. He even tried calling Nathan's personal number, left voicemails, each one softer, more pleading. But they all landed in the same place. Silence. Because Nathan wasn't looking back. He was too busy breathing life into Project Phoenix, a cutting-edge modular data pipeline he had once pitched internally, only to have it killed by Stratix's finance team for being too ambitious. Now, reborn under the banner of Vector Forge, it wasn't just a product. It was a statement. And then came the reckoning. At Tech Vibe 2025, the industry's most watched innovation summit, Nathan walked on stage like a man holding the fuse to someone else's powder keg. No theatrics, no venom, just precision. Today, he said, Vector Forge is proud to announce our strategic partnership with Everlight Industries. It took seconds for the implications to register. Gasps rippled through the room like falling dominoes. Everlight, the same client Stratix had mishandled, the same one whose paused contract had triggered internal panic, was now in Nathan's camp. By Wednesday, Everlight's legal team sent notice. Contract terminated with Stratix, citing breach of trust, continuity risk, and loss of key personnel. The penalty fee alone, $2.2 million. Cameron's silence that night wasn't from dignity, it was from shock. And somewhere, Nathan probably slept better than he had in years. The fall of Cameron Bryce wasn't theatrical. It was surgical, swift, precise, and bloodless in the way only corporate executions can be. Exactly 31 days after Everlight's public departure and the $2.2 million penalty hit Stratix's balance sheet, the board convened in private and ended his tenure with a unanimous vote. There was no farewell email, no LinkedIn announcement, just a leak, deliberate, almost ceremonial, of an internal memo that described his decision to oust Nathan as operational sabotage dressed as strategy. The phrase ricocheted through the tech world. Stratix was no longer hemorrhaging, it was caving in. Top recruiters wouldn't touch the brand. The company's Glassdoor rating plummeted into the red. Dev teams once considered elite now scrambled just to meet patch schedules. Clients, sensing weakness, began renegotiating contracts or walking altogether. Investors withdrew. The very name Stratix, once synonymous with enterprise innovation, had become a cautionary tale whispered at networking events. Across the river, Vector Forge was building something different, something alive. What had started as a think tank had become a magnet, drawing in not just the disillusioned and displaced, but the best. Engineers, designers, researchers, all people who had once stayed at Stratix out of loyalty to Nathan were now building freely, unburdened by hierarchy, bureaucracy, or fragile egos. Clients came, not because of market pressure, but because they believed in the vision, because they trusted the man behind it. And Nathan? He remained calm at the center of the storm he never intended to ignite. When he sat down for an interview on the Founder's Edge podcast, his demeanor was light, not smug, but whole. The host, visibly brimming with curiosity, asked the inevitable, "Why didn't you sue? Push back legally? Demand restitution?" Nathan chuckled softly, his voice composed. "I didn't need revenge," he said. "I needed a clean slate. The rest handled itself." He paused, letting the silence settle like truth. "And to those who followed me, I didn't ask you to. You saw what mattered. You remembered who built the foundation." The host leaned in, sensing a final note. "Do you ever miss Stratix?" he asked. Nathan didn't hesitate. His answer was crisp, unwavering. "No," he said, "because everything we built walked out with us." And in that moment, it was clear. The real legacy wasn't in logos or infrastructure or contracts. It was in people. And they had already chosen